Hey everybody, it's Derek Christensen from Legion Law, PLLC. I am coming to you today with a video on marital property agreements, which sounds like a strange topic, but it's actually extremely important, as we'll discuss. So before I dive into that, I wanted to remind you guys how to reach out to me. You can email me directly at Derek, D-E-R-E-K, at legionlawpllc.com, or you can contact me on our Contact Us page on my website, www.legionlawpllc.com. So those are both ways to reach out to me, and I'd be more than happy to help you guys out if you have any estate planning or probate questions. So let's dive right into the topic today. It is marital property agreements. What are they? Why do they matter? How do you make them happen? And I laugh because I actually had a client and I was working with an estate planning attorney just early this morning about that very issue. And they're pretty important because they can really screw things up, at least here in Texas. So some states are separate property states. Some states are community property states. Texas is a community property state, which essentially means that every piece of property or any kind of asset that a spouse or a couple obtains during their lifetime is considered mutually shared by them. It doesn't matter who paid for it, it doesn't matter who obtained it. Again, I'm broadly speaking here, but essentially everything is, both spouses have equal rights to a piece of property. So for example, a house that's paid from a joint bank account, that's going to be community property. A car paid for by both people's money. I mean, the husband could earn all the money and the mom could be staying at home or vice versa. It doesn't matter. If it's joint property paid for that asset, then that asset is going to be mutually considered between the two. So that's really, really important because in divorces, in split ups, in dividing up assets, if there's community property, then you can have claim to it no matter what the circumstances. So the client I'm working with right now, they had a divorce. Unfortunately, the man ran off with the secretary, and they had a trust. And the trust states that all the property that's put inside the trust is community property, no matter what it was beforehand. And that means that the man, ran off. He called the divorce, and he busted up the whole trust. He tried to take everything out and put it in his own individual name, thus kind of screwing over the wife. And the property he had before that he put inside the trust was his own property, but because the trust states otherwise, there's a big conflict. So either way, the conflict has arisen as to whether or not he's entitled to the property or the property he took out of the trust is actually part of his wife's estate as well. So yeah, legal battles are not fun, and that's why you need to figure it out, because these marital property agreements, I have my notes here, I'm looking at them, they are a way to avoid this headache. So marital property agreements simply are an agreement between husband and wife, spouses, that one property is one spouse's property, the other properties are the other spouse's property. And that's very important to differentiate, because if you guys ever get divorced, if one person passes away and has a different will than what you're anticipating, it really depends on who can do what with what. So if I have separate property, if the house that my spouse and I live in is separate property to me only, I can do whatever I want with that property in my will. But if I were to pass away and we both own the house together as community property, then she has a say on at least half of what happens to that house. I could transfer my half to someone else or whatever, but at least in Texas, my spouse, if it's community property again, can do whatever she wants with her half. So after I pass away. So that's the important designation here. So marital property agreements simply state, hey, we have a community property, let's say the house again, we have a community property between the two of us, but we're just going to agree together in the signed document that it's only Derek's, it's only my spouse's, whatever. And you can just designate what happens, who owns what, specifically between the two of you or separately. And these are just mutual agreements. In Texas, there are a couple of different forms of it, but the main one is just simply put, you need to make sure that it's in writing, signed by both spouses, it identifies the property that's being converted, and it specifies if it's separate or community property. Now, that may sound like a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo to you, but it's pretty simple to accomplish, but you want to make sure that it's done correctly, because there could be extremely negative consequences done in the future. Again, if you give somebody permission to make something community property and then you try to take it back later, you're kind of you're in a tough position because that person will have a say on what happens to that property, and vice versa. You know, if you have a family home and you guys have lived there for 30 years and then you give one spouse the separate property, they could very easily run off with it and have extremely negative consequences for you and your side of the family. So it's very, very important to talk to an attorney, but these are very common agreements that are made during divorces, split ups, death upon, or when somebody passes away. Just major life events that need to differentiate between who owns what and who can do what with that property if there were an extreme circumstance. So again, talk to an attorney, make sure all things are good to go, and almost always you're going to want to have an attorney on your side to explain the consequences of all these agreements that you make, because if you go without it, you could very easily be signing away your rights to something very, very important, and you could regret it substantially later on. So that being said, that might be a little bit longer than necessary to explain it, but it's extremely important to make sure it's done correctly, and I do it. And I do it sometimes. I do it all the time. I help people out with all sorts of things, planning things out to make sure your estate and your legacy and your family is protected. So that being said, please reach out to me if you have any questions like this or about any other issues for estate planning and probate. You can reach out to me again at Derek, D-E-R-E-K, at legionlawpllc.com, or you can find me on my Contact Us page on my website, www.legionlawpllc.com. So thanks again. We'll catch you guys on the next one, and hopefully this was beneficial to anyone out there who needs it. So see ya.